Today I'm going to introduce hypertext markup language. You may have seen HTML. I'm sure you have some experience with it. You can't really do anything with the web unless you have an understanding of HTML. We're going to go through this briefly. I'm going to walk you through the main highlights of HTML and give you an opportunity to become more familiar with the topic. First of all, I differ from the L in HTML. HTML is not a language, at least not in the structure of something like Python or Java. It simply denotes the structure of a web page. This is very important, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in depth in a few minutes, but HTML is not the format or the design of a web page. It simply denotes the structure of a web page. What is the intent of that structure? And we'll talk about that in more detail. The newest HTML structure is HTML5, which extended the available tags dramatically. As a matter of fact, you can even create your own structures in HTML5. Now, we'll cover the most commonly used tags. HTML5 is very powerful. You can even create applications using HTML5, but we won't go quite that far. We'll just deal with the basics of HTML given the structure of this class. So the basic structure of an HTML page is listed here, and I do expect that all of your pages will have this structure. I do occasionally forget to do this at the first line here, this doc type HTML. Technically, it's optional, but it is encouraged. It does allow your page to render faster because it communicates to the server what is the coming document, okay? So when it says that the doc type is HTML, it communicates to the server what format to expect, so it does render it faster. Now you'll notice there's also an opening and a closing HTML tag. This is very important. You must have the closing tag here, and it does indicate the structure of most HTML structures, and that is, you have HTML and then you have the /HTML, which is the closing structure. That encloses all of the HTML on the page. Notice the doc type is the only thing outside of HTML because technically it is not HTML. The head section is what we call the metadata section. That is the information about the page. The title tag, for example, will not be displayed on the page, but it communicates and is used, for example, in search engine optimization. And it does show up in the little tab at the top of your browser. So when you browse, if you want it to say, for example, the name of your company in that tab, you need to put that in a title tag. It's very important. There's also a link element. The link element is used to connect your page to the CSS document, the cascading style sheet, which is what is used to actually format or design your page, but we will get there in a subsequent video. Notice again that the head tag has an opening and closing element, very important, and you'll notice that those do not overlap with the body section. Those are two distinct elements. The head section is ended and then the body section begins. The body section is what is displayed. So whatever you put inside the body element, that will be what is actually displayed on your page. The H1 is a header. That H1 is usually the header of your page. Students get this confused with the title. The title is not displayed, except of course in the tab at the top. H1 will be a first order heading. So in the semantics or meaning of an HTML page, H1 indicates it is the first order heading of the page. You can kind of think of it as being, for example, in a document, the title page of your document. It is confusing because I know title is in the head section and that is technically not displayed, but those are very different in terms of their indication. The next thing inside the body is a paragraph or a P tag, and you'll notice that the P tag surrounds another A tag, which is the anchor tag. Now, whoops, sorry, didn't mean to hit that. In HTML parlance, what this means is that this is a paragraph, and an anchor tag is what we call a hypertext link or a link to another page. In this case, it would link to the UD homepage, and it would display the University of Delaware. Now, we'll have plenty of opportunities to use this, but you will need to know the formats of this to make sure that you get it right. The format of a tag. So most tags have an opening and a closing tag, as I mentioned. The paragraph tag opens and then the paragraph closes with a /p. That's a paragraph. Now, technically, some tags don't have to be closed, but you should always do so. It does speed the processing and it does help the page render correctly. Some tags are what we call self-closing. So an example, we have an image tag here, an IMG, which of course displays a picture or a graphic, and it's a dog.html. Dog.jpg. You'll notice that the ending here is a with the closing tag. That's a way of, it's called a self-closing tag. You can technically use the same format of a /img as well, but most people don't do that. They use the self-closing approach where you just use slash and then the closing bracket. So that's the opening tag, that's the closing tag, as I mentioned. The block elements versus inline elements. This is extremely important, but students often blip over it because they don't think it's important, because HTML works almost all the time anyway, so why do I have to do it? Well, there's a couple of reasons. First of all, as an IT professional, you should do things the right way. You should be aware of it, and people who know the right way to do things will think that you're being sloppy, and sloppy is not good in IT. Block and inline elements must only be used inside the body section of a page. They can't be used in the head section. Now, when I say can't, if you put in one of these block or inline elements, will it work? Technically it will. I mean, you can actually put, for example, a paragraph in the head section and it will be displayed on the page, but it shows that you don't know what you're doing. So just make sure that you follow along with this and you use it correctly. Block tags are always rendered as a rectangle. Okay, so examples include P or paragraphs, div or divisions, UL, which is, we'll talk about in a minute, which is an unordered list, and BR, which is a line break. These are called block tags. Okay, now inline tags must be used inside of a block tag. Okay, and these are rendered in line with the content. So in the earlier example, when I used University of Delaware, you'll notice that this is a P tag on the outside in green, and then the in blue is the anchor tag. This is the correct format of an anchor tag. The University of Delaware there, and then the closing A tag. That is correct. A is an inline tag. Okay, you can only be used inside of a block. Very important. So you see there it says enroll at the University of Delaware is how it will be rendered. Notice it is also technically wrong to have an anchor tag without a containing block element. I see this quite frequently on students' pages where they will put an anchor tag just hanging out there. Now, there are good reasons to do this, okay? Because if you don't, for example, use a tag correctly, you may not be able to format it. So if you have, for example, an anchor tag and you're trying everything you can with cascading style sheets, which we will get to later in this module, you won't be able to format it. And I get this question from students sometimes, like, I've tried everything and I can't get it to work. The reason is you may have to apply the CSS to the block element. And if you don't have a block element, there is technically no way to format or change the format of a particular inline tag. So don't use inline tags unless they're surrounded by block tags. As I say here at the end, HTML is incredibly forgiving. I say it fails gracefully. And that's, even if you commit cardinal sins, it will still work. But again, you should always follow the guidelines because it shows you know what you're doing. Now here's a listing, not certainly comprehensive, but here's a listing of block elements versus inline elements. And you'll see that there are a number of block elements that you can choose from, and we will go through many of these in subsequent videos. The difference between a break and a paragraph, by the way, paragraph is in a sense it's a paragraph of text. A line break, typically you want to end at the end of a line, but you don't really want to create a paragraph. So there are cases where you want to use BR to end just to end a line. Image, of course, is used. IMG is an inline element used for images. A is an anchor tag, and that's for hypertext markup languages. Span is used to delimit a section of text, usually within a paragraph. So if you have a paragraph, but you want to say one word and you want to make it italic, for example, then you would use a span to do that. Remember, always include an inline element inside of a block element. And again, as I mentioned earlier, it's a good practical reason for this. Yes, you can get away with it quite often, but if you try to format that particular anchor tag or image, for example, you want to change the size of the image and you can't seem to do it for some reason, it's probably because it's not inside of a div or it's not inside of a paragraph. So make sure you always use block elements around inline elements. A common thing that we will use is ordered versus unordered lists. We'll use unordered lists much more commonly than ordered lists. The only difference here is the O and the U. You'll notice the structures are the same, so I've listed 3 of my favorite bands. An ordered list is typically rendered as a series of numbers, 1, 2, 3, and it will number them for you automatically, while unordered lists are typically rendered as bullet points. But here's the problem. I want to make sure you know this. That is, a UL is not a bulleted list. Students will say this quite often, and they say, well, I'm going to use a bulleted list, so I'm going to use a UL. That is technically not correct. The reason a UL is displayed as a bulleted list is because that is the default format in CSS. And the reason the 1, 2, 3 are used in an ordered list is because that's typically the default format in CSS. You can structure these and format these technically in any way possible. And one of the most common uses of an unordered list is a menu. So the UL is the menu structure itself, and each LI represents the main menu option. And then you might have, for example, a hierarchical list of LIs, and then those become the submenus. So that's probably one of the most common uses of a unordered list, is the structure of the navigation system of a website. So just remember that. Very important to remember. So if I did ask you, for example, that a UL is a bulleted list, the answer would be false. And the reason, again, is because it is the structure, but it is not the format. HTML is the structure, not the format. Tables. Tables are a little confusing until you get used to them. Tables begin, of course, with a table tag and then end with a closing table tag, as you see here on the right. Each row is indicated with a TR, which stands for table row, of course, right? And you'll see this. So this is a row, this is a row, and this is a row. And then you indicate the columns within the row by using a TD. A TD is for table data. And so this opens and closes and open and closes. So you'll see that there are 3 rows, but there are 2 columns. Okay, this is commonly used. It's a great way, if you can get comfortable with using tables, they're really a great structure to present data, because it does present them in a nice, clean, structured way. Forms, I'm not going to go into this in great depth in this particular example, but we will be using forms. The good thing is that even the example I'm giving you here is probably more complicated than the one that we're going to have to use, because Django will do a lot of things for you automatically with forms. But this is what a form would look like. A form is used to capture data from the user. The user can enter data in some way and commit it to Django, so Django can process it in some way. Typically, you're going to start with a label, open and closing label, and you'll see that over here in terms of enter street. And then you have an input element, okay? And the input element indicates the type. Text here indicates that it's going to be a text box. Name is the name, actually, of the variable that's going to get passed to Django. In the second one here, we have a submit, which is the button, and we give it a value, search by street, and that's what actually appears here, of course, on the button itself. And then we have enter price, same structure, and another submit button. Now, forms are very important because, again, they allow you to enter data, but if you want to use any of these elements, for example, the input elements or the button elements, you must actually surround it first with a form. No data will get passed to Django unless it is inside of a form element. Now, we're not going to go through what each of these, the method and the action indicate, but I will talk about them in a subsequent video, or we'll do some class exercises to understand how this is done. Finally, we want to talk about the Django template language, because what's most important about this slide is that you know that the Django template language is not HTML. It also technically is not Python. It is a Python-like scripting language that is embedded within HTML and is recognized, of course, by Django. We've seen some examples with this, and we've used some examples in class. I'm going to do a dedicated video on this, on the Django template language. But you've seen this type of structure so far. The important things to remember here is that anytime you're using any kind of Django-like syntax, for example, the for loop here, you must use the brace with percentage symbols. That flags Django that this is not HTML or text to display. It is actually a structure to be processed and to be evaluated. Variable names must be surrounded, of course, with 2 curly braces. And the last thing that's important here, okay, the last thing that is important here is the ending structure. You must typically end all Django structures, all Django template language structures in some way, typically with an end. So if you're using an if statement, you must use an end if. If you've got a for loop, you must use an end for. Okay? And like I said, I will do a dedicated presentation on this later in the semester. I hope this makes sense. We'll see you in class. Take care.